Hello everybody and welcome to this special edition of the Twilight Zone review series. Actually, this will not really be a review. I thought it would be fun, since I finished the entire first season, to do a best and worst of season 1 video, kind of recapping my favorite and unfortunately least favorite episodes of the first season, and just giving you brief reasons why. And I would like to say that Season 2 reviews are on the way very soon, and I would like to thank everyone who has watched any of my reviews, and if there's anyone new watching this video, this recap video, thank you for that as well. So I think I will start with the worst here and just go through, and there were 5 episodes that I did clearly think were worse than the rest this season, but the first 2 on this list really weren't that awful. I gave them 2 out of 5s, which really does speak to the quality of the first season of the show, that there were only 3 episodes out of 36 that I gave under a 2-star rating. But these 2 episodes still had some issues, and at number 5 I am putting the 16mm Shrine. This is the episode with the lead character Barbara Jean Trenton, who is really just not a very likable character. When I reviewed this episode, I said it was okay, but just mostly meh. I used the word meh, bland, whatever you want to say. Not much really happens in this episode. The lead character just isn't convincing enough. Her motivations, she's not likable to root for. That really hurts the episode. And the ending is unconvincing and kind of silly when she literally goes right into her film. The effects work on it just don't really look that good. And like I said, it's just kind of meh. There's not really much else to say about this episode. Just not very good or memorable, but not terrible. So I'll just move on. The next one is another episode I gave a 2 out of 5, which is A Nice Place to Visit, which I actually dislike more. I'm more annoyed with than 16mm Shrine, because it's too campy. The lead character is completely unlikable again, but this time, instead of being subdued like Barbara Jean Trenton, he's just way over the top. It's a one-note premise, the whole fact that he's in a different afterlife than he thinks he is. It's stretched out throughout the entire episode, and that's all the episode has going for it. It's very padded. And the ending of this one is also very predictable. You can figure it out in the first half of the episode, and it's really campy. Just the whole thing just doesn't really work. This one I actually like the premise, how all the good things that were happening to him turn out to be bad because they become boring and predictable. I like that, but the execution of this episode left a lot to be desired, but it still wasn't awful or grueling to watch. Now these next 3 episodes on the list, 3, 2, and 1, I thought were really bad. I debated between numbers 3 and 2, but I decided to put Elegy at number 3. It was an episode I gave 1.5, and this one I do fault the premise. I just thought the premise was bad. It was very uninteresting for the most part. The lead characters, you couldn't really sympathize with them. The whole premise of people living their afterlife in worlds that they like, but being still, you can't really tell they're alive. Except you could tell they were alive because a lot of them were moving and then they were still again. Trying to use real people for this was just a bad idea. You can clearly tell at times people are moving. It completely took me out of the episode. And the ending is very mean-spirited, in my opinion, for Twilight Zone. Yes, not every episode ends well, but in this case it didn't even really feel like the characters did anything to justify this ending. It feels like this ending was just done to be a twist, and this episode really didn't work for me. I just didn't care about anything going on in it. Number 2, the 4 of us are dying. I actually probably had a harder time getting through this episode even than what I have ranked at number 1, but objectively it's probably a little better. This episode had no point. The lead character, yeah, he changes faces, and that's like a cool concept. This episode actually had a good concept, which is why I rated it ahead of Elegy, but it wasn't executed well at all. This guy can change his face, but why? They don't really establish why he ever does this, until maybe the very end of the episode. Maybe it's to get out of trouble. But we go through the whole episode just wondering, is this guy a jerk? Does he just do this to mess with people? And also the pacing of this episode was all over the place. A couple scenes seemed rushed. A couple scenes seemed like they went on forever and ever. Scenes that weren't interesting. And a lot of bad plot contrivances. It seemed like illogical things happen and coincidences just happen because that's what we needed to happen to further the plot instead of being anything, logical or interesting. And none of the characters, this episode actually needed to be longer, where some episodes were padded and needed to be shorter. This episode needed more length because none of the characters were fleshed out enough, and the ending is definitely one of the worst. I think the ending of number 1 is worse, but this ending is really, really stupid. A guy just shoots another guy because he doesn't like him, and to me that's totally even against what Twilight Zone stands for, or the spirit of Twilight Zone. It just seemed like we need this guy to have justice done to him, so we'll just invent this ending out of nowhere, which is over melodramatic and bad. And I just really didn't like this episode at all. I actually wanted it to end 5 minutes before it was even over. Just bad. And I actually thought this was going to be number 1 for a long time, but then near the end of the season, my number 1 pick, the Mighty Casey, came along. This episode is the only flat-out awful season 1 episode. I gave this episode a 1 out of 5. I don't even know if it deserves a 1. This was a troubled production. There were a lot of reshoots done because they didn't like the way the episode turned out. The first lead actor they had health issues, and they didn't think the script was funny. They reshot it. Like I said in my review, I don't know what the original looked like, but it didn't turn out any better the second time, that's for sure. It's supposed to be a comedy. It's not funny. The whole concept is bad. Just a robot baseball player. Who cares? To me, it's not interesting. And then at least they didn't do anything with it. Nothing really happens in this episode. It doesn't even really feel like a Twilight Zone. It feels like a bad sitcom, honestly. It has cheesy sound effects when he's pitching. And the actor that plays Casey isn't really very good either, to be honest. Just painfully bad. I felt like I was in a bad version of the Twilight Zone watching this episode. But what really makes this episode horrible more than anything else is the ending makes absolutely no sense. This episode tells you, this is what it tells you, everyone, that if you have a heart, you can't have any competitive drive. You can't strike anybody out if you're a pitcher because you feel bad for them. When you have a heart, you have compassion, but you have nothing else. It limits you to just that. It's just bad. I would say watch it for yourself to see, but actually don't watch this episode unless you are a completionist like me and you have to watch every episode, because the Mighty Casey is completely awful. Like I said, I think I actually got through it easier than 4 of Us Are Dying, but the whole pointlessness of this episode and the ending I really thought was dumb. And for a show that's so well written, most of the time, other than these couple episodes, I just didn't think the ending made any sense. Now we got all the negatives out of the way. They're gone. We are going to go to the positives and the reasons why I watched Twilight Zone. Now, very quickly, I just want to say that I had 6 episodes that were rated 4.5 or higher, but I wanted to keep this as a top 5 list. So I do have an honorable mention, which is A Stop at Willoughby. Now, this might surprise some people that I actually ranked it as the honorable mention, because I mentioned that it used to be one of my favorite episodes. Watching it again, I realized its minor flaws, which aren't many. There's a little bit too much push, and not enough Willoughby. I felt it needed a little more balance. But I still thought it was a great episode with a memorable lead character that gives an excellent message, and I still really love the episode. I just thought that these 5 episodes were a little better for reasons that I will get into right now. I really had a hard time ranking 5 and 4, but I ultimately decided on this order. Number 5, The Last Flight. A great Richard Matheson episode, way, way underrated. Why I don't hear this as one of the great episodes, I don't know. Lieutenant Decker, the main character, has a great character arc where he goes from someone who's not really a hero to a hero. The whole time travel aspect of this episode was way ahead of its time. It's had an influence on a lot of movies and TV shows that I've seen. How what you do in one time period can affect and even change what happens in another one. That really gave the episode a modern feel, which I really like. It doesn't really feel that dated. There's a lot of good episodes, but they do feel a little dated. This episode feels like it could have been made yesterday. Like I said, it was influential. I liked the pacing. It was also different and interesting. A lot of other Twilight Zone episodes, had interesting plots, but this one really stands out as them attempting to do something different. And I really like that. A lot of Twilight Zones are great character studies, but this really was a very interesting plot, but they still made you care enough about the characters. It did a lot for a 25-minute episode of TV. A lot of modern stuff could learn pacing-wise, how to condense everything you need to get into an episode from The Last Flight. So it's just all around very solid, although I didn't feel it quite had the dramatic impact of the next couple. That's why it's only at number 5. But take nothing away from Last Flight. It's really good. Number 4, one of my all-time favorites, Perchance To Dream. Oh, good old Edward Hall that doesn't want to fall asleep because he says he won't wake up. If Last Flight is underrated, Perchance To Dream is even more underrated. This episode is ridiculously underrated. I have no idea why. Maybe it's a little too surreal for some people. Not for me. I really like the dream within a dream concept. That was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Yeah, now it's done a lot of dream inside dream inside dream. But back then, not so much. Maya the cat girl, I still don't know why he called her a nightmare. To me, she is one of the all-time great characters, and personally, I don't think she'd be a nightmare at all. I wouldn't mind having her in my dream. And the really great thing about this episode is the atmosphere. You almost feel this episode when you're watching it. Some of the dream sequences are intense. That's impressive for TV from the late 50s, early 60s. You can really almost feel like you're in this episode, and it has a cinematic type quality to it. I really thought the production values were high quality, and it's just excellent the way it's made. It really works. The acting is very solid overall, and it's still very modern and topical. People still talk about and try and analyze dreams, and a lot of people, have fears and things from their dreams. So just a great episode all the way around. Highly recommended. And I even think some non-Twilight Zone fans might like this one because it's pretty fast-paced and it's more of a visual episode, whereas a lot of Twilight Zones were character and writing-driven. And visual media is very popular now, so visually it's pretty stunning. So thumbs up for that, and thumbs up big time for Perchance To Dream. Number 3, And When the Sky Was Opened. Another great episode, one that is revered as a classic for good reason. This episode's just flat out riveting and suspenseful. The concept is unique, it's well acted, but it's also well written. Who could ever forget Lieutenant Forbes or Ed Harrington? Ed Harrington is actually in the episode for about probably 5 minutes, yet I still remember him vividly as one of the great Twilight Zone characters. Rod Taylor did a great job as Lieutenant Forbes in this episode. This episode explores the mysteries of the unknown, and it's one of the few endings that doesn't explain its ending. You can actually, debate it any way you want, but yet it works. I don't always like unexplained endings. Sometimes it can be a cop-out, but because this episode is about the unknown and what happens when you're in space, the ending works. It's an episode still people talk about and try and interpret, and it's just overall an episode you really have to experience. It's also very well directed. The way the scenes are shot, they flash back in time and forward. It's all seamless. It's a really, really good episode and rightly remembered as a classic. It's just very memorable and very rewatchable too. Maybe the most rewatchable episode of the season, even more than Perchance To Dream, because even when you know the twist, because the twist is unexplained, you can catch new interpretations when you watch it again. That's a plus to having an unexplained twist. Really great episode and well worthy of my number 3 spot. At number 2, I've got to go with The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. There's a reason this is considered a classic, because it's pretty great. Probably the biggest cast of season 1. I can't think of an episode that had a bigger one. And it's very well acted. The premise is really good in this one. How things start happening in a town and they all turn on each other. I actually believe this could happen. I felt it might have been slightly exaggerated, which is what kept me from giving the episode a 5. But that's a small complaint. Most of it is pretty realistic. I like the way it builds and builds and builds. It's got a great pace to it. And it's got an interesting portrayal of aliens as well that I really, really like. I like the way they're portrayed as intelligent. And they're not really portrayed as an enemy or a hero in this episode. They're portrayed as observers who let the humans basically turn on each other and destroy themselves, which is just an absolutely great concept. The episode's very relevant still today because, of the way that people can sometimes act as far as paranoia, and when they don't understand something about someone else, there's a lot of discussion about that kind of stuff still in society today. I'm not going to get into a lecture about that. Everybody has their own opinions on it. But I do feel it's very relevant today and topical. And like I said, it has one of the all-time great Twilight Zone endings, probably top 5, which really elevates it. And it just pretty much succeeds in every way possible and is well worthy of a number 2 spot. And it's a classic. So, but when it came down to it, anybody who saw all of my reviews or maybe caught this one specific review, my number 1 episode and the only one I gave a 5 out of 5 rating was The After Hours. An episode I had seen before and thought was good, but wow, did it blow me away this time. Marcia White, probably my favorite season 1 character. I actually felt everything with her, the confusion, the horror, everything. Anne Francis, phenomenal performance, really great. Probably my favorite season 1 performance in the show. Yeah, I said it, probably my favorite. It's a completely crazy, ridiculous premise. Mannequins coming to life, but it works. How they pull this off, I will never ever know. Shouldn't work at all. Should be cheesy. I completely bought into it. The episode's atmospheric and creepy and has a movie quality, but not necessarily a B-movie quality. Not that that would be terrible. I think it's more of almost an A-movie quality, which for its time is amazing. The special effects in this episode were great, whereas I talked about an Elegy, which was on my worst list, how I thought the effects missed. I thought the effects really hit here. The transformations from mannequin to human, human to mannequin were really good. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The direction was excellent. I liked the slow build. There were clues given, but not so many clues that you could really see the ending coming. But when I first saw this, I thought the ending came out of nowhere, but it really doesn't. There are enough clues there for it to make sense, and the remarkable ending shot of Marcia, once again as a mannequin. This episode was great. I think it's well worthy of a number 1 spot, which is saying a lot in a very strong season of Twilight Zone. I want to thank everybody for watching this video and any of my other videos, and season 2 reviews will be starting very soon. And thanks for watching.